My name is Naomi Carter. I'm 27 years old. And the first time my parents told me I had 2 days to get out of the house my grandparents left behind, I didn't scream, cry, or ask them how they could do this to me. I just stood there in the kitchen doorway with my hand still wrapped around a cold coffee mug, listening as my mother spoke in that soft, fake, calm voice she used whenever she wanted to sound reasonable while saying something cruel. My father stood beside her like the decision had already been stamped and filed. My younger sister leaned against the counter wearing the kind of smug little smile people wear when they think the ending is already theirs. They said the house was too much for me, that I was being selfish, that a family home should go to the daughter who was about to get married and build a real future. Then came the deadline. Friday. 2 days. Pack your personal things, leave the keys, and don't make it ugly. What they wanted was a fight. They wanted tears, begging, maybe one last desperate argument they could twist later into proof that I was unstable and ungrateful. But I already knew something they didn't. I knew what was sitting in the wall safe upstairs. I knew why my grandfather had stopped looking worried in the final weeks of his life. And I knew that if they opened that safe believing they had already won, the look on their faces would be worth every second I had spent staying quiet. So I nodded once, said okay, and walked away like a woman who had just lost everything. My grandparents' house in Stonemill Point was the only place I had ever felt chosen instead of tolerated. It sat on a quiet rise above the water. A stone farmhouse with deep windowsills, old pine floors, and a back porch that caught the last gold light every evening. To strangers, it looked like valuable coastal property. To me, it was the place where my grandmother taught me how to make blueberry cobbler without measuring cups, and where my grandfather taught me that a person's character always shows up when no one is forcing them to be decent. 3 years before he died, everything changed. My grandmother started forgetting little things first, then bigger ones. She left tea boiling on the stove. She put the sugar in the refrigerator. She once looked right at me and called me by her sister's name. My grandfather tried to keep the house steady, but I could see the fear in him long before he ever admitted it out loud. I was in graduate school then, working toward my master's degree in healthcare administration, driving back and forth every weekend from Providence, then every few days, then almost every day by the end. I became the one who knew which pharmacy had her prescriptions in stock. I filled the pill organizer, called the home nurse, paid the heating bill online, and sat through long silent evenings while the television played to a room that no longer felt sure of time. My parents always had an excuse. There was a business trip, a client dinner, a gala. There was always some emergency in their own lives that somehow outranked the slow collapse happening in this house. My sister Chloe was worse, because at least my parents knew they were neglecting something. Chloe treated the whole thing like an inconvenience that ruined the mood. She came once with flowers, took 3 pictures by the hydrangeas, posted one online with a caption about cherishing family, then left before dinner because she had reservations with friends in Newport. I remember standing at the sink washing dishes while she laughed on the porch, talking loudly on the phone about how depressing old houses smelled. My grandmother was asleep in the next room. My grandfather heard every word. He said nothing, but I saw the way his jaw locked. The more I showed up, the less my family did. My mother would call and ask whether certain documents were still in the study. My father would ask if the property taxes had gone up. Chloe would walk through the rooms like she was already planning where to put new furniture. No one asked if I was sleeping. No one asked how I was managing graduate exams while helping 2 people decline in front of me. No one asked what it cost to be the one who stayed. My grandfather noticed all of it. When my grandmother died, he changed in a way that scared me. He got quieter but clearer, almost sharper. It was like grief burned the fog out of him and left only the truth. 2 weeks after her funeral, I was helping him into bed when he squeezed my wrist and said very calmly, "They think I don't know what they're waiting for." I asked him what he meant, even though I already knew. He looked toward the hallway, toward the study, toward the whole house, and said, "They're not waiting for me to get better, Naomi. They're waiting for me to be done." I didn't answer because there was nothing I could say that would make that less cruel. He exhaled slowly and added, "You are the only one who ever came here for us. Everyone else came here for what comes after us." That was the night I understood that the story my family would tell later was never going to be about love or fairness. It was going to be about possession. A week after that conversation, my grandfather asked me to drive him into town. He said he needed to see a lawyer about routine estate housekeeping, and he said it in such a casual tone that someone who didn't know him might have believed it. But I knew him. I knew when he was pretending something was smaller than it really was. We drove to a brick office near the marina where a local estate attorney named Ethan Rowe had practiced for more than 30 years. He was quiet, exact, and impossible to rush. My grandfather trusted him, which was enough for me. I stayed in the waiting room at first, but about 20 minutes later Ethan opened the door and asked me to come in. My grandfather was sitting straighter than he had in months. There was a file on the desk, a notary stamp nearby, and a yellow legal pad covered in Ethan's small, neat handwriting. My grandfather looked at me and said, "I need you to listen carefully because I am done pretending your parents are going to do the right thing on their own." What he told me that afternoon changed everything. Years earlier, he and my grandmother had made a will leaving the house and estate to their son and daughter-in-law under the assumption that family would behave like family. That assumption was gone. In its place, Ethan had prepared a new structure, an irrevocable trust. The house would be transferred into it. The purpose was not to make me rich. My grandfather said that more than once. "This is not a reward, Naomi. This is protection." The trust named me sole trustee and gave me the right to live in the house and preserve it. It also made it very difficult for anyone to pressure me into selling, mortgaging, or giving it away. I remember saying, "They'll hate me for this." And Ethan, without looking up from the page he was organizing, said, "They will hate the boundary, not the truth." People who feel entitled to something always call it cruelty when you refuse to hand it over. My grandfather signed that day. The notary stamped the papers. I signed where Ethan told me to sign. When we got back to the house, my grandfather was exhausted, but relieved in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. After he passed, I met Ethan again, finalized the trust transfer, and recorded the documents properly. But I did not announce it. That part was strategic. Ethan advised me to wait, because he believed my family would reveal their intentions much more clearly if they thought I was defenseless. He was right. That was when I prepared the safe. The wall safe in the upstairs study had always fascinated my family because they assumed anything old and important had to be locked inside it. So I made sure that when they finally opened it, they would find exactly what they deserved to find. Inside, I placed a sealed envelope with my grandfather's handwriting on the front, a notarized copy of the trust documents, a short letter from Ethan confirming the effective transfer, and a flash drive containing an audio recording my grandfather had made during his final weeks. On top of everything, I placed one single sheet of paper in plain view. It said, "If you are reading this because you came looking for something to take, then you already know why you were left out." I knew my mother would open the envelope with shaking hands. I knew my father would go silent first, which was always how he reacted when he realized control was slipping. And I knew Chloe would keep insisting there had to be some mistake, because people like my sister never believe consequences are real until they hit them in the face. So when they stood in my kitchen and told me Friday was my deadline, I didn't argue. The real deadline was not mine. It was theirs. Friday was the day their fantasy was going to collide with paper, signatures, and the one thing greedy people never respect until it ruins them: proof. The 2 days between their threat and Friday were some of the strangest of my life, because I had to look like a woman preparing to lose her home while actually preparing to keep it. I packed enough boxes to make the performance believable. I labeled some with books, winter coats, kitchen things, even though I never intended to move them out. I carried them into the guest room where anyone glancing through the doorway would think I was giving up. At the same time, I backed up every email, saved every text message, and forwarded copies of everything to Ethan. My mother called Wednesday morning in a syrupy voice and asked whether I had found a place to stay. She said she was worried about me being alone. Then, in the same breath, she reminded me not to take the antique silver because that was family property. My father called later pretending to be reasonable, saying dragging things out would only embarrass everyone. Chloe texted me a picture of a white kitchen she liked and wrote, "This would look amazing once the house feels younger." I stared at that message for a full minute. The house where my grandmother lost her memory and my grandfather lost his wife was, to my sister, a before picture. Thursday night my mother showed up alone with pastries from a bakery I used to like in college. She stood in the doorway in a cream coat and told me the family was under stress, that Chloe's wedding was coming, that my father had sacrificed so much, that maybe I was making this harder than it needed to be. I let her try guilt, nostalgia, softness, and martyrdom. Then I said I was tired and closed the door. By Friday afternoon the house felt like it was holding its breath. They arrived just before 5, exactly when they said they would. My father came first, carrying himself like a man who expected the scene to go his way because scenes usually did. My mother followed, already performing offense at my silence. Chloe came last, all bright lipstick and confidence, wearing tall boots she probably should not have worn on gravel. She looked around the foyer and said, "Is this all you packed?" I said nothing. My father asked for the safe key. I told him it was where it had always been, in the top drawer of the study desk. I stood back just enough to look like I had no strength left to fight. I wanted them comfortable. I wanted them careless. The study smelled faintly like cedar and old paper. My father moved straight to the safe. My mother stood near the window with her arms folded tight. Chloe leaned over his shoulder the way she used to lean over bakery cases when she was deciding which dessert to take without paying for it herself. The door clicked open. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then my father went still. My mother stepped forward and said, "What is it?" as if the answer might still be something harmless. He pulled out the top sheet first. I watched his eyes move across the sentence. Then I watched the color drain out of his face. My mother took the papers from him. She read faster, then slower, then once more like the words might rearrange themselves if she refused to accept them. Chloe grabbed the flash drive and asked what this even was. Her voice had gone thin. My father ripped open my grandfather's letter and read in complete silence. That was the moment I knew they understood. Not emotionally, not morally. Legally. The room changed. Everything in it changed. My mother turned to me with a look I had never seen on her face before. Not because she had never felt it, but because she had never needed to show it to me. Fear. Real fear. "Naomi," she said, and this time there was no softness in it. "What did you do?" I looked at her and said I followed instructions. Chloe started saying there had to be some mistake, that Grandpa would never do this to family, that someone had tricked him. While she talked, my father kept scanning every page like a man searching for the one sentence that would save him. There was none. They left 10 minutes later without pretending anything anymore. My mother forgot her purse on the study chair and had to come back for it. My father did not look at me when he walked out. Chloe did. And if hatred had a temperature, the room would have cracked from it. Then the phone calls started. My mother called 6 times in 10 minutes, then 8 more. She left a voicemail so breathless it sounded like she had run upstairs. "Naomi, please do not file anything else. Please call me back before you talk to the lawyer. We need to discuss this as a family." Then another voicemail, colder. "You do not understand what you are doing." Then another, shaking again. "Please, please do not do this." I did not answer a single one. I saved every message and listened to their panic stack up in my inbox, one call at a time. By Saturday morning the war had moved into the town, which was exactly where my mother liked to fight. Stonemill Point was the kind of place where news traveled fast, but so did sympathy if you packaged it correctly. My mother had always been good at that. By noon, 2 people had texted me asking if I was really trying to take everything for myself. One woman from church who had not visited my grandparents once while they were alive wrote that my mother was devastated and just wanted peace. I almost laughed. My mother did not want peace. She wanted access. So instead of responding emotionally, I built a file. I saved every voicemail, printed every text, exported every email. One of Chloe's was especially useful because she had forgotten to be careful and forwarded me an exchange with a wedding planner asking whether late summer would be a better time to host an engagement dinner at the house before listing it the following spring. Listing it. Not preserving it. Not living in it. Selling it. Ethan nearly smiled when I showed him that email, which for him was the equivalent of laughing out loud. He also helped me gather records I never thought I would need. Copies of pharmacy deliveries I had signed for. Receipts from grocery runs. Invoices for repairs I arranged. Gas station charges from the long drives while I was in graduate school. The home nurse wrote a statement confirming I was the only family member who consistently coordinated care during my grandparents' decline. Meanwhile, my parents kept making mistakes. My father sent a message saying, "You have made your point. Sign over shared management, and we can all walk away from this with dignity." Shared management meant give us the weapon back and trust us not to use it again. My mother tried a softer approach and wrote that legal conflict would only hurt my grandmother's memory. People like her always dragged the dead into arguments they never bothered to show up for while those people were alive. The biggest gift came Sunday night. Chloe, furious and careless, sent a message meant for my mother to me by mistake. It read, "If she doesn't cooperate, tell Dad to push the debt angle. She'll fold if she thinks everyone will know why we need the sale." She unsent it a few seconds later, but not before I took a screenshot. Debt angle. That was the first time I knew for certain my father's financial situation was worse than anyone admitted. Ethan looked into it carefully and legally, and by Monday, he had enough to confirm what we suspected. My father's business was failing. A bank line had tightened. Personal debt was pressing. He had not wanted the house because it represented tradition. He wanted it because it represented escape. The fake urgency, the 2-day deadline, the sudden insistence that Chloe needed it for her future. It was never about her future. She was just the prettier story they hoped would make theft look sentimental. The situation got uglier before it got better. My mother filed a civil petition challenging the trust. They claimed my grandfather had been too frail to understand what he signed and that I had manipulated him while acting as caretaker. It was disgusting but not surprising. When people cannot beat your documents, they attack your character. Ethan filed our response the same day and told me to prepare for a hearing. He also told me something that stayed with me. Truth matters in court, Naomi, but composure matters almost as much. They want you emotional. They want you to look unstable. Do not lend them your face for their story. So I stopped reacting. I slept badly, but I showed up prepared. I wore a navy suit. I organized our binder. I brought my grandfather's audio recording, the nursing statement, the care logs, the repair invoices, the email about listing the house, and the screenshot about the debt. The hearing was held on a Thursday morning in a county courtroom that smelled faintly like paper, coffee, and floor polish. My parents sat at the petitioner's table with Chloe between them, dressed in pale blue like innocence had a color. My mother dabbed at her eyes before anything even started. My father looked tense, tired, and furious under the surface. The judge was a woman in her 60s with the kind of face that told me she had no patience for manipulation disguised as concern. My family's attorney painted me exactly the way Ethan predicted. A grieving young woman, isolated, overwhelmed, emotionally compromised by loss, unable to responsibly manage a valuable inherited property. He said my parents had acted only out of concern for preserving family harmony and avoiding financial mismanagement. Family harmony. I nearly smiled at how absurd that sounded after the week they had put me through. Ethan stood when it was his turn and did not waste a second on dramatics. He started with dates. He walked the court through the trust formation, the execution, the notarization. Then he laid out my grandparents' care history and who had actually been present during those years. He presented the nursing statement. He submitted the expense logs. He showed copies of my travel records and the invoices in my name. He did not say I loved them more. He did something better. He showed I had done more. Then he asked for the audio recording to be admitted. My mother's lawyer objected. The judge listened, looked at the transcript Ethan had prepared, and admitted it. When my grandfather's voice played through the courtroom speakers, thin but unmistakably clear, something inside me steadied. He said he was not confused. He said he was protecting the house from people who saw it as money. He said he chose the granddaughter who had been there. My mother stared straight ahead. Chloe stopped pretending to take notes. My father shifted once, then went completely still. Then Ethan introduced Chloe's email about hosting an engagement dinner before listing the property. Her lawyer called it casual brainstorming. Ethan countered with her text complaining I was delaying the renovation timeline. Then came the message about pushing the debt angle. He layered it deliberately. First greed, then planning, then motive. Finally, he moved to my father's finances. He didn't need to expose every private detail. He only needed enough to show why the urgency existed. Ethan asked my father whether he had proposed shared management after learning about the trust. My father said yes. Ethan asked whether the family had given me 2 days to vacate before any court ruling. My father hesitated, then said they had offered a transition plan. The judge looked up at that wording. Even she could hear the spin in it. Then Ethan asked, Mr. Carter, were you under financial pressure at the time you attempted to force access to the house? My father said, every family has pressures. Ethan asked again, more specifically, whether he was seeking immediate control of the property because he believed a sale or refinancing could relieve those pressures. My father looked at the judge, looked at his own lawyer, and then looked at me. And then he said the sentence that ended them. We only needed her to stop being selfish long enough to sign so the family could stabilize things. The courtroom went quiet in that total way rooms do when someone has admitted too much to ever take it back. He had turned concern into strategy and family into leverage in a single sentence. The judge asked him to clarify. He tried to walk it back. But the damage was done. When the judge ruled, she was precise and cold. She upheld the trust. She denied the challenge in full. She recognized me as the lawful sole trustee and found no credible evidence of undue influence, noting that the documentary record overwhelmingly showed I had been the primary caregiver and property steward. She criticized the attempt to pressure me into vacating before legal resolution. She ordered my family to pay a substantial portion of my legal fees. She also entered a civil order barring them from entering the property or contacting me outside legal channels for 2 years unless I expressly agreed in writing. My mother cried then. Not because she had lost me, but because she had lost control of the story. Chloe looked like someone had knocked the air out of her. Later, I learned her fiancé's family had pulled back their financial contribution to the wedding after realizing the house she had hinted would become part of their future was never hers to use. The wedding did not end, but the fantasy did. My father walked out of court looking smaller than I had ever seen him. Within 2 weeks, he quietly resigned from a local fundraising board he had always used to polish his reputation. No one announced why. No one had to. My mother called once more from an unknown number that evening and left a voicemail I never answered. She said I had humiliated the family. I listened to it while standing in my kitchen and thought, no, you did that yourselves the moment you tried to throw me out of a house I had spent years protecting while you were too busy planning what you could do with it once the old people were gone. I drove back to Stone Mill Point the same afternoon the hearing ended. The drive felt shorter than usual. Maybe because for the first time in weeks I was not driving toward a threat. I was driving home. The house looked exactly the same from the road, which I loved more than I can explain. The same stone walls, the same weathered porch railing, the same stand of trees bending slightly in the wind off the water. Nothing about it announced victory. It was just still there, which was enough. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the silence that had held me together more times than I could count. I walked to the kitchen, set the kettle on, and reached for the old ceramic mug my grandfather used every morning. It had a small chip near the handle and a faded blue rim. I took my tea to the back porch and sat where the light hit the boards in late afternoon. From there I could see the water and the edge of the garden my grandmother loved even after she stopped remembering the names of half the flowers in it. I thought I would feel triumphant in some loud, blazing way. I did not. What I felt instead was clean. Clear. Like the pressure in my chest had been released one careful turn at a time. I did not save the house because I was stronger than everyone else or smarter or colder. I saved it because I stayed when staying was hard. I stayed when the doctor's updates got repetitive and sad. I stayed when the bills needed paying and the groceries needed carrying and the nights felt too long. I stayed when there was nothing glamorous about it, nothing profitable, and no audience to clap for me. And in the end, that mattered more than charm, more than entitlement, more than blood. Blood can make people related, but it does not automatically make them loving, safe, or worthy of trust. Real family is not defined by who demands access when something becomes valuable. Real family is defined by who stays present when life becomes difficult, inconvenient, and unphotogenic. Love without boundaries can be exploited. Kindness without documentation can be rewritten. And loyalty without self-respect can turn into a cage. Protecting yourself does not make you cruel. Keeping records does not make you calculating. Refusing to surrender what you built, preserved, or cared for does not make you selfish. Sometimes the most responsible thing a person can do is put compassion and evidence in the same hand. That is not bitterness. That is wisdom. I looked out across the water and thought about how badly I used to want my parents to become the people I kept hoping they were underneath all the control and performance. Peace came when I stopped waiting for that version of them and started believing the version they had already shown me. The house was quiet. The porch boards creaked softly under my chair. Somewhere down by the water, a gull cried once, and then everything settled again. I was still 27. I was still alone on that porch. But for the first time in a long while, alone did not feel like abandoned. It felt like free.